Hello, my name is Islam Dalali, and I am the games director for the production of Lost Melody, which is a top-down rhythm-based action game. The story follows two protagonists, Bowie and Queen, who were transported into an alternate Earth whilst playing in a concert together. Bowie and Queen quickly realize that in this alternate Earth, music does not exist, and that it is up to them to restore music back into the world. The gameplay revolves around the player not being able to move in any direction. Instead, they can only attack in 4 different directions: up, down, left, or right. Enemies will spawn in those 4 different directions, and it's up to the player to attack those enemies to the beat of the music. Our game drew a lot of influences from other games, especially when it came to the gameplay mechanic. Games such as Project Rumbus and 64.0 already have a very similar game mechanic to ours. Although a lot of people will probably think about the Undying boss fight from Undertale first, and this is a much more popular example of a game mechanic. The thing that made our game different, however, from games like Project Rumbus and 64.0 is that we wanted to create an entire story behind this game mechanic, as well as making the game a pure rhythm-based game. I say pure as all the enemies attack the player, and the player must attack the enemies to the beat of the music, similar to games like Guitar Heroes and unlike games like Project Rumbus and 64.0. I probably had the most fluid role in my group, as I was able to contribute a lot with the art, the sound, and the programming of the game. Although I mostly focused on helping my team with the programming and implementing the art and sound in Unity. Before I was even able to start my pre-production, I did have to think of a concept of what I wanted my game to be. I thought that a rhythm-based action game would probably be the most unique idea, and that it could lead to a lot of experimentation in that genre. When I got into my group, we went straight into brainstorming any ideas that I might have for the game. I had a solid idea of what I wanted the gameplay to look at, and my visual artist had a good story that he wanted to tell. So we simply merged those 2 ideas with some minor tweaks, such as the names Bowie and Queen, who are the 2 main protagonists of the game, as well as the actual looks of the characters. You can see over here in this section called Boy, which refers to Bowie. He was supposed to have silver white hair and a t-shirt with a music note on it. We did, however, change it gradually as we had to change our art style. When it came to the stages, we thought about having the player play in different cities around the world so that we were able to experience different kinds of music that were relevant to each place. And it also gave us a lot more variety of what kind of music we could implement into our game. We settled on having the player play on Brazil, London, and Moscow. We chose the city based on what music could really fit with our game, and we also considered how spaced out each level was on the map, so we don't have a lot of levels cluttered around into one place. We also jumped straight into creating our concept art, storyboards, and flowcharts as we transitioned into our pre-production phase. For our concept art, we somewhat used the time to create concept art to experiment with different art styles. We knew from what we've gone from questionnaires, surveys, focus groups, and just a general understanding that we only have 7 weeks to make this game, that a pixel art style will probably be the most favorable art style, but we also wanted to explore what kind of pixel art style that we wanted as well. We originally wanted a pixel art style that emulated the art style of the game Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, but we quickly changed it as we found out that it's quite difficult to use the art style without just ripping it off. So we decided to use a bit more conventional art style that drew some inspiration from the artist Vanilla and the game Hyper Light Drifter. Overall, pre-production did change a lot of things about our game. Some areas of pre-production changed our game more than others. Concept art probably changed a lot more in our final game than any other aspect. It even changed our story slightly, as we wanted to introduce a villain into our game, which we ended up calling Mute from our concept art stage. And he can be seen in the opening cutscene as well. I touched upon the research that I have done. I should probably elaborate on the research as well as my findings from my research. I sent out a questionnaire and a survey and tried to get as many people to complete those as possible. Some of the results from the questionnaire suggested that a lot of people like to play in PC games as like the primary gaming platform, and a large factor as to why is because people thought that it controlled better than console controllers. We also asked about what type of games they like to play. We got a wide variety of answers as we expected, but we also found a trend that people tend to like action-based games and story-based games instead of games that had a focus on exploration. We also conducted multiple focus groups to find out what our audience would want from our game, and what they would change from our idea. We got a lot of helpful answers that has really impacted our final game. An example of this would be the fact that someone from our focus group wanted to see multiple types of enemies, so we introduced the grey enemies. Some people also liked the idea of a rhythm-based game and also wanted to see a wide variety of music to accompany it. After our pre-production and research, we had to present our idea to a panel of industry professionals. It was quite nerve-wracking to say the least. We were able to effectively explain what our game idea was, and we received a lot of valuable feedback from them, including the fact that they wanted to see our game on mobile as they believed that it really suited that market. This was also the first time I actually got to work in a team to produce a game like this. I did actually work in a team before to make a game with the Games Jam project, but it was really different and it had a really different atmosphere from when I created Lost Melody in my current group. This is because during the Games Jam project, we kind of just went straight into making the game without having to worry about making a detailed and lengthy pre-production and research stage. We also were able to work in our game for the entire day during the Games Jam project, but for this final major project, we had English and Maths that would break up the time that we had to work on our game. We ultimately managed to stay focused throughout the entire project. There were some instances where we were slightly off task, even I was guilty of that, but overall there was little to no conflict within the group, and we managed to do what we set out to do. This was also the first time that I got to have the role as a games director, which I did not have during the Games Jam project. I was actually the programmer during that. Being a games director was actually a great privilege, although it did bring a lot of stress to it as well, as I had to manage the work of the team and to encourage and help the team members who were maybe struggling with their work. But it was definitely fun, and I had the most fluid role, and it really taught me the value of being a leader. I really managed to achieve a lot in terms of my mechanics and what I was able to implement. The actual game mechanic was simple enough, and I was able to create a very early prototype showcasing how the game was going to be controlled in about an hour on a Sunday afternoon. I managed to create the basic script of the enemy moving towards the player, and the way I did that was that I made sure that using an if command, the script would check tags on what enemy was moving, and they would adjust the speed accordingly. So depending on what the enemy is called, they can either be moving left, right, up, or down. And I was also able to make a script for the player where if the enemy were to touch a collision box, they would die, but the actual collision box would only be activated for a short amount of time. Although building the core game mechanic was easy, the thing that we ended up having to spend most of our energy on was adding smaller elements that polished up the game. These kinds of features will probably go unappreciated considering how small some of these features were, but an example of this would be a save and load feature, which I managed to implement using the player prefs function that Unity offers. This way I could keep track of where the player is and allow them to continue the game later on if they wanted to, without the fear of having to start the game all over again. Something else that I've learned whilst making this game, which again is another small feature, yet it was very, very important as it solved a lot of issues for us, was the use of a difficulty setting. We really needed this as when it came to the QA testing part of our game got a lot of conflicting feedback in regards to our difficulty. A lot of people thought that the game was too hard, but at the same time, a lot of people liked the difficulty of the game, including the team. So we were really stuck on what to do until our teacher, Curtis, suggested that maybe we should implement a difficulty setting, which was something that I've never really done before and never really thought of doing. Therefore, I was quite stuck for a while until I found out about something in Unity called static variables, which are essentially global variables that can be called in any class without having to instantiate it. This means that I could set an integer static variable to equal to 1, for example, when the player selects an easy difficulty button. And then when the player is in the level, the enemy script can call that static variable and change the enemy properties accordingly. I used the static variable in this way, but instead of changing the enemy properties directly, I created a game object that could store an array of enemies. These would be the hard enemies. When the static variable is equal to 1, which corresponds to the easy difficulty, the enemies in the array would be turned off. But if the static variable is equal to 2, which corresponds to the hard difficulty, the enemies in the array will be turned on, thus making it very easy for both I and the team to create easy and difficult versions of our game. This is especially important as all the enemy placements are placed manually, which is very time consuming in itself. So creating a different scene with a hard version of the game would be even more time consuming. In terms of the visuals of the game, I was quite proud of my contributions for the visual aspects of it, considering that I'm not a great artist myself. I managed to create the background of the level that you can play, as well as the level select globe. Those are very easy pixel art that I've just done. I also helped to create some other objects with my visual artist. An example of this will be the stage. I created a rough version of the stairs that my visual artist redesigned in order to fit the game a little more. I also created the first rendition of Queen as well during our concept art stage. I also managed to create the slime monsters that were seen in the opening cutscene. This was probably the most significant one for me personally, as it was the first time in the entire year that I have used a graphics tablet to create a piece of art that was then implemented into the game. Other than that, I created a lot of small effects and shaders in the game. An example of this would be the blur effect that was seen in every level start menu kind of thing before you actually get to start the level, as well as some particle effects in the level select menu, as well as the cutscene. I was also responsible in implementing all of the animations in Unity, which were not very hard in itself, but implementing some of Queen's animations were quite difficult. The process of actually adding the animation in for everything else was very easy, but when it came to Queen, a lot of the coding was very kind of made it more difficult, as I needed to play a different animation depending on player input, and if an event occurs, like if the player died or something like that. And I also had to consider entry and exit transition and if the animation was responsive or not, and to report that to my visual artist if something was not right. Ultimately, I learned a lot by contributing to the visual aspects of the game. I learned about particle effects and how to use them effectively. I also managed to improve my art in terms of creating pixel art as well as drawing in general. Some of these lessons were actually so significant that I plan to use them when I eventually remake some of my old games, especially my endless runner called Prima, as I wanted to use an effect like that in the title screen, and I know that I could definitely do that using particle effects. When it came to sound, I did not have a lot of contributions in terms of creating the sound effects for the game, although I did create the hit sound effect. A lot of my contributions when it came to sound came from how I manipulated existing sound effects and the music in the game by using code. The most obvious example would be that the slowdown effect that could be heard when the player dies, and it could also be heard during the opening cutscene as well. The effect was not very difficult to create in Unity, and it had a very special property of being very versatile, and it could be activated at any time in any scene, no matter who you are. The way that I created the effect was by creating a serialized private audio source variable. Let's call it music1. In the void start function, I would set the music pitch to be equal to 1 by writing the line music1.pitch equals to 1. This would mean that the speed and pitch of the audio source would be playing normally. And by using an if command, I can change the pitch of the music by using an if condition is met. Let's say that the condition is that the player dies. I would then write the line music1.pitch minus equals 0.05. This line of code tells the script to reduce this pitch by 0.05 for every frame, thus creating this effect. If I had one more week to work on this game, I probably would spend a lot more time ironing out more bugs that could be found in the game, especially in the opening cutscene. We also plan on adding an ending cutscene and maybe even a boss battle with Mute, but sadly, due to time constraints, we were unable to achieve this. I am, however, very happy with how the game turned out, and I definitely learned a lot from this experience.